Chapter 2 14 Years Before Integration. Caramel stared at his newly acquired cutie mark. 3 blue horseshoes going in a circle. What did it mean? And what was his special talent? Just what exactly did he do to get that? As far as he knew, he hadn't done anything particularly special that day. Maybe your talent is making shoes, Lucky suggested. Or maybe you just like running around in circles, Shining Armor piped up. He snickered and bumped hooves with the gray colt. Yeah, very clever. Caramel rolled his eyes. They were all sitting around a little campfire in the middle of Pebble Woods under a lightly clouded sky of deep blue and sparkly stars. A sharp gust rustled the great pines towering over them, and quite a few colts and fillies shivered in response. Every pony huddled closer to the fire, but with the wind sweeping over them like that, its warmth kind of got blown away. So some of them resorted to snuggling up to each other instead. Cherryberry, Minuet, and Berry Punch were huddled together in a tight bundle. Noteworthy was nervously pawing the ground as he was hugged by Vinyl, and Lily was lying on the ground next to Roseluck. Naturally, Sassaflash was right beside Caramel. They pressed together for warmth, shared a look, then shot smug grins at Lucky and Shining together. The 2 colts were the only ones without filly buddies at the moment, which left them with the agonizing choice of freezing their tails off or cuddling together. Personally, Caramel was hoping they'd cave in and do the second. It would provide the class with enough teasing material to last them through till next term. Shining and Lucky simply glanced at each other before awkwardly shifting to lean on each other's back for warmth. Not quite enough to qualify, but spiky-maned Vinyl did mouth the word, "boyfriends," to every pony. Amidst the giggling and smirks, the 2 colts didn't find that particularly funny. Hee. Payback was always so deliciously sweet. "Gosh, kids, half of you look ready to freeze to death," said Mr. Oakey as he came trotting back to camp. The big, red earth stallion deposited a large cooking pot next to the fire and added, "You should have called for me sooner. I didn't know that the fire was almost ready to go out." As their teacher tossed more wood into the campfire and poked around the embers to help them catch, Caramel's thoughts wandered back to the cutie mark he'd gotten. He hadn't noticed when it had appeared, which meant that he couldn't be sure of what he was doing at the time of its appearance. He certainly hadn't done anything that was related to horseshoes, that was for sure. No pony else seemed interested in talking about it either. Maybe it was because they'd all grown out of the magical moment, with him being the last in their class to get one. Or maybe they were all waiting until he could actually tell them what it was in the first place. Noteworthy could sing, Shining was protective of his little sister, and Lucky was, well, lucky. Why'd he get saddled with one that was all deep and symbolic and stuff? At least, Caramel hoped it was symbolic. A talent all about horseshoes was probably about as interesting as watching grass grow. "Okay, that's much better," said Mr. Oakey as he gave the crackling logs a final prod. "Now that we've got a proper fire going, who wants to help me make the stew?" He rummaged through a saddlebag stuffed to the brim with various vegetables, naming each of them as he placed them into the cooking pot. "Bit of seasoning, carrots, potatoes, onions, and of course this special ingredient." The stallion paused, staring at the now empty saddlebag with his eyebrows raised. "Ew, I was certain the mushrooms were in here. Caramel, where'd you put them?" "Huh, what?" Mr. Oakey was giving him a patient but firm look. "Remember the King Belites? You were taking them back for me." "Oh, right." Caramel had been with the teacher before dark had set in, when they were still collecting firewood and all that. Mr. Oakey had been plucking some mushrooms and had asked him to carry the little bag of them back to camp whilst he stayed behind to chop a fallen tree into more manageable pieces. The trouble was that he couldn't remember what he'd done with them. "Did you wander around instead of going back to camp like I told you to?" Caramel hung his head. He had wandered off a bit earlier. He'd spotted some colorful fish swimming in the stream on the way back, and had put the bag somewhere because he didn't want the mushrooms to get wet as he trotted downstream a bit to watch the rainbow trout. He couldn't remember for how long.
Can't he just go look for them since he was the one that lost them?
Asked Cherryberry. Almost all of his classmates murmured in agreement.
Well, I can help,
Sash piped up. Caramel felt a small surge of relief. At least some pony was on his side here. Mr. Oki shook his head.
It's dark. You wouldn't be able to find them. I have good eyes,
The turquoise filly insisted. The stallion shook his head again and replied,
I'll not take the risk. And besides, it's not the end of the world. We'll just make do without the special ingredient. I'm sure my cooking skills are up to the task.
Caramel wasn't paying much attention to Mr. Oki as he rambled on about the basics of making a good stew. He was thinking about what Shining Armor had said earlier, along with their teacher's words. Or maybe you just like running around in circles.
Did you wander around and...
3 horseshoes going in a never-ending circle. Wandering. Was that his special talent? Being scatterbrained and losing stuff?
What are you thinking about?
Asked Sassaflash, gently nudging his shoulder. Caramel blinked and pointedly shook his head.
Nothing. I'm okay. Are you sure?
Sometimes it seemed like she could see right through him. Gazing into her big orange eyes filled with concern, he sighed and said,
I'm not sure what to think about my cutie mark.
He followed her eyes to his flank and quickly looked somewhere else.
I mean, do you think I'm, forgetful?
It took her a while to answer. When he turned back, he found her looking at Mr. Oki, who was currently showing a very enthusiastic berry punch the basics of making tea. She then glanced at Shining and Lucky, who were chatting amongst themselves. Her eyes narrowed and she suddenly sat straighter.
Oh,
she said, turning back to him.
Are you seriously that worried about your cutie mark? You know, even if your mark means what I think you think it does, you should know there's more to a pony than a picture on your flank. You decide who you are. I think the pictures only show you half the way there.
Huh. Caramel had never thought of cutie marks that way. They were kind of a big deal to every pony around here, but maybe ponies from other places had different ideas. Where did you say you were from again? He suddenly asked. I think I've forgotten. The question seemed to surprise Sash. Her brows creased, and she seemed to take a moment to think about it before answering.
My hometown's a bit south of Baltimore, a long way from here. I don't think any pony here is familiar with it. Why do you ask?
Caramel shrugged. I don't know. You just have different ideas. Sometimes you talk a lot like a grown-up.
Oh.
Sash seemed to relax. She smiled and shifted until she found a more comfortable position next to him. A couple of years back, he might have felt nervous about being seen by every pony, but now he was just grateful that she was taking the edge off the cold wind blowing through the woods.
I just happen to have a strict mom who prepared me well for life,
she explained. 3 months before integration. Caramel considered himself lucky that the changelings were so accommodating. He'd half expected them to simply beat him into submission and wrap him up in one of those sticky cocoons that he'd seen during the Canterlot invasion. Instead, they'd merely stripped him of his saddlebags and hustled him down the tunnel like a dirty animal that no pony was particularly keen on keeping in their house, but had to because it was important to some pony else. The leading changeling had extinguished the light on its horn, so Caramel was basically walking blind, until they came up to the place where his flashlight had settled after its roll down the tunnel. Just a minute, guys. He slowed and bent down to pick it up, but before he could get a hold of it, a black hoof came down hard on its head, shattering the glass and releasing a tiny shower of sparks from the bulb. Darkness swallowed everything up once more, and Caramel glared in the general direction of the culprit and said,
Was that really necessary? I just need a little light. There's enough light in here, so stop complaining,
the changeling growled in response.
Oh, yeah, tons of it.
Sure, there were little lumps of green, luminescent stuff plastered to the walls, but they weren't exactly the sort of things that you'd trust to light your house, much less a dark, dirty tunnel full of who knows what. At best, they only allowed him to make out the faintest of outlines or silhouettes, and even then only if there were enough of the luminescent nodes clustered together in one place. He wondered if they could see him rolling his eyes. The quick smack to the back of his head confirmed it, and he was shoved back into a forced march down the tunnel. They prodded him with their horns if he moved too slowly, and allowed him to stumble or outright bang his head against rocky projections if he went too fast or didn't watch where he was going.
Oh, that's right. I can't.
They proceeded thus for several minutes, and after a while, Caramel sensed that the tunnel was growing wider and branching out. The change in echoes and the sound of their hoofsteps also made it clear that the ground on which they trotted was a lot more solid than higher up, probably rock. There were twists and turns, and several times he'd felt something hard and pokey brush past him, clicking and hissing away. There were more changelings in the tunnels now, ones that had business other than herding him around, though why they never reacted to his presence was a mystery. Perhaps that was how ponies were treated before they got sealed up in a green pod?
Hayseed, maybe I should have thought of a plan B.
He had no way of knowing if his escorts were even leading him to their queen. Well, they'd not harmed him excessively so far, so the reasonable part of him decided that he could spare some trust for the time being.
Trusting a creature that is now well known for deceit? Yeah. There is no way this could possibly go wrong.
The tunnel abruptly opened up into a massive chamber, one that was well lit when compared to the passages he'd been through. There were green orbs that hung from the ceiling on long and dark strands of stuff that looked like dried mucus, emitting a soft, steady green light. Pillars of jagged rock coated in grime rose up haphazardly into the darkness throughout the chamber, and at its center stood a mound that was seemingly made of silk dipped in sticky mud and glue. It had a single opening at the top which was rimmed with tiny spines, and as they approached it, a tall figure gracefully crept out, silent as a spider. The Changeling Queen. She was a match for Princess Celestia in stature, but whilst the alicorn shone with benevolence and kindness in her countenance, the Queen seemed to radiate an atmosphere of tension and anxiety. She showed no expression other than a mildly contemptuous sneer and...
Did she just lick her fangs?
His hairs were suddenly standing on end.
Kneel! You are in the presence of Queen Chrysalis,
one of his escorts hissed in his ear. Caramel obeyed, and the leader of his captors, the one with thicker armor, bowed to the Queen and said,
Your Highness, this pony wishes to join the hive. What will you have us do?
The monarch, or tyrant as Caramel was led to believe, appraised him with cold eyes. He shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen that look before. It was the kind of look that a cat had before it started playing with its food. But in the next moment, the Queen suddenly seemed to lose interest.
Toss him in with the others,
she said, waving a holy leg dismissively.
I have no use for him.
No! He'd not come all this way for nothing. Come fire or lightning, he was not going to leave this place without at least saying goodbye to Sassaflash. Caramel dug in his hooves as his escorts tried to drag him away and yelled,
Didn't you hear correctly? I'm here to join your hive!
The Queen was unimpressed.
You seem to be working under the delusion that you're in a position to make demands, pony, she replied. Why should I accept you? You're an earth pony. You cannot influence the weather, you cannot use magic, and your kind's affinity with agriculture is useless down here. What could you possibly offer us?
Undying loyalty!
He shouted frantically. He'd lost his footing, and the changelings were already carrying him off. Queen Chrysalis gave a sharp chirp followed by a series of rapid clicks. His captors immediately stopped and unceremoniously dropped him on the ground before skittering off to the edges of the cavern. He picked himself up and trotted towards her, stopping just short of what he assumed was the appropriate personal space of a monarch.
I mean it, he said. I will serve you.
Intriguing,
The queen mused.
but I'm sensing an if in there.
I want to be with Sassaflash.
She raised an eyebrow.
Who?
Caramel sighed.
She's one of yours. Well,
Understanding dawned on Chrysalis's face.
Oh my, so it is for love that you've come to us. How touching.
She grinned wickedly and added,
Tell me, how did you find out? Was her disguise destroyed at the wedding? Or was it because she told you out of love, out of the hope that you ponies might accept her for what she was? It's not unheard of, you know, for some of my children to lose themselves on the surface world.
Caramel remembered all right, but it wasn't something he wanted to tell any pony at the moment.
What did she do with the original? Come on, don't stammer. The suspense is killing me.
She didn't replace any pony. She had always been one of yours, he growled, and how I found out is none of your business. Chrysalis stalked down from her mound until she was towering over him and flashed a toothy grin.
You are aware that you are in my domain, right?
A sudden pressure clamped down on Caramel, and a quick glance downwards confirmed that he was enshrouded in a green aura. He felt his weight lessen, and he involuntarily flailed his hooves a little as he was lifted bodily into the air.
Being defiant isn't going to earn you much patience from me, and crushing you will be pitifully easy,
Chrysalis continued. Caramel grimaced as the pressure on his body increased, and a groan escaped him as he tensed his muscles in response. It was almost like he was being squeezed from every direction at once. He gasped when he finally needed to draw breath, and the pressure was suddenly gone. The green aura disappeared, and he landed on all fours and only just managed to avoid toppling over. After taking a moment to recover, he turned his gaze upwards, back to the queen.
Show no fear. Come on. You can do it.
Her fangs were so sharp, and her jagged horn was still glowing with menace. This was the creature who had defeated Princess Celestia in single combat. What hope did he have against her? His limbs were quivering, and his bladder felt quite ready to empty itself there and then. But the memory of the day Sash first got her cutie mark flashed in his mind, and he took a deep, calming breath and ignored the urge to simply turn tail and run. He stood as tall and firmly as he could and replied,
It won't change anything. I'm still here for Sassaflash. And if you let me speak to her, you can do whatever you want with me after that. I won't even struggle.
At least you've got a shell, or a spine in your case,
she said, putting a hoof to her chin. She then shot a sidelong glance at the changelings watching them and added,
The swarm could certainly use more with your qualities. The invasion might have gone differently had that been the case.
There were quite a few things on Caramel's mind, but the wedding was pretty low on the list of priorities.
So, may I see her?
Fine, you'll get a few minutes.
She made those hissing and clicking noises again, and one of the changelings replied in kind. She frowned for a bit, but gave a sharp response, and her minions skittered off into the darkness. As they waited for Sash to arrive, Queen Chrysalis trotted in a circle around Caramel, inspecting him in a way that was not unlike how a farmer inspected a vegetable that she was going to harvest.
You will quickly come to realize that I do not tolerate weakness in my hive,
she said.
How certain are you that this is what you wish to do?
I know with all my heart that my place is by Sash's side,
he answered, looking her right in the eyes. Besides, I don't think I'll be much better off saying no. The queen grinned.
True, but at least you won't need to exercise willpower when you're in a cocoon. And it will save me the trouble of trying to fit you in with the rest of my children.
He shook his head. I'll join, and not as a victim.
Caramel! What are you doing here?
A familiar voice cried. Whirling around, he spotted her crawling out of a narrow passage. The green lighting in the chamber distorted her colors, but he was sure that they were the right ones. Besides, he recognized the style of her mane and the intelligent curve of her brows. And, of course, her twin lightning bolts cutie mark was unmistakable. He ran straight towards her. As they embraced, she said with a quivering voice,
Oh, thank the stars. I knew you'd come for me.
Wait. Caramel pulled out of the hug and stared at Sash. Her eyes were wide open and watery, and when she blinked, 2 lines of tears slid down her cheeks. She tried to draw closer, but he kept his composure and continued to look her in the eyes. Slowly, her smile faded. She sniffed, drew in a shaky breath, and asked,
What's wrong?
Everything. How'd I get my cutie mark? He asked. She blinked.
What? I don't understand.
Sash, please answer me, Caramel insisted, gently but firmly. More tears came, and Sash gave him a reproachful look as she began to sob.
Caramel, why are you asking me this? After all we've been through, don't you...
Drop it.
Queen Chrysalis interjected.
He's not an idiot.
Sash blinked, and all at once her demeanor went from anxious and reproachful to sportingly disappointed.
Drat.
What gave me away?
Asked Sash as her coat, feathers, and colors melted away into green flames to be replaced by a hard, black carapace with a chitinous frill for a mane and stiff, translucent shreds as wings. Sash was never this sappy. Although Caramel sort of expected it, he still recoiled when he found himself half-hugging a giant bug in his forelegs. Why should I even tell you? He groused as he pushed it away.
Because he asked nicely?
Queen Chrysalis suggested.
He? You had a male pretend to be Sash?
Caramel blurted, staring at the changeling in front of him, which was grinning like a prankster that had just one-upped Pinkie Pie. He wouldn't have guessed in a million years. All the creatures looked the same to him.
Is there a problem?
Chrysalis shot him another smirk.
Come to think of it, do you even know if Sash is really female?
Her eyes widened for a second, and her expression suddenly became even more evil and delighted, if that was even possible.
Wait a minute. Have you two ever had, intimate contact?
What are you... Wait, no!
Caramel felt his hindquarters thump to the floor as he considered the implications of this latest bit of information. They'd never done that, but they had gone a little beyond... No, he didn't want to think about that right now. He realized with a start that the changelings were making those chittery noises again, laughing at him. Jerks, he growled.
Meh. Just ignore them,
said another voice. It was shallow and scratchy, but its tone was familiar. Caramel turned to face the source of the voice, and saw another changeling stepping out of the shadows.
They just want attention,
it continued.
They want every pony to see how cool and clever they are. And that's needy.
His eyes widened. Sash. She trotted towards him and pulled him into a tight embrace, and Caramel decided that it didn't matter that she hadn't changed back into pony form. He hugged her back, hard carapace, holy legs, and all.
Yes,
she said.
And if it will set your mind at ease, I am female. Wonderful. You just ruined everyone's fun,
Chrysalis muttered. Caramel turned and saw the queen frowning in disappointment. It was almost a sulk.
Oh well, she added. At least I have one more surprise for you. Did you know that she was one of your escorts?
Caramel turned back to Sash and saw her nod silently. Hayseed. He hadn't even recognized her when she'd been with him all the way. Was it coincidence that she'd been amongst those taking him in? Which one had she been? Why didn't she say anything earlier? How could he not even recognize his very special somepony when she'd been right by his side the whole time? His bewilderment must have shown, for Sash said,
It's nothing to be ashamed of. We're changelings. It's what we do best.
This is your last chance, pony,
the Queen added, striding towards them.
For the amusement you've provided, I'm willing to let you go free if you decide you want nothing to do with her anymore. But if you choose to join us, you should know that you'll be doing it for someone you wouldn't even be able to recognize if she didn't want you to.
Caramel gazed at Sassaflash. Her eyes were now blue and lacked pupils of any sort, but they were still filled with concern for him. That much he could see. The curved, sharp horn on her forehead looked dangerous, but he'd never seen her use it to harm any pony, and he was sure that she would not, ever. It didn't matter that she was now covered in a black shell, or had legs that were full of creepy holes. This was still the same Sassaflash that had gone to school with him, and laughed and cried with him all the way. He hadn't quite gotten used to the fact that she was a changeling, but by the stars, he was not going to let that come between them. He'd learned to accept. She deserved better from him.
Don't throw everything away, Caramel,
she said, averting her eyes.
Ponies are not meant to live under the world.
And I'm not leaving you alone with this bunch of jerks, he said, shooting a glare at some of the changelings present.
But why would you do that?
Best friends forever, remember? He replied, lifting a hoof. When she didn't bump it, he softly added, and more than a friend. Turning towards the Queen, he sighed heavily and announced, A deal's a deal. I'm all yours. He didn't know how, but Chrysalis managed to cram both motherliness and pure evil into that one smile. She gestured grandly at the chamber and tunnels all around them with a foreleg and said,
Welcome to the hive, Caramel.